Another interesting bit of news this week, our pal Ross Dellinger over at Yahoo Sports had a report on Michigan's response to the NCAA about the Connor Stalions case. So this one, as we all know, these things take a long time. They're contesting the facts of the case, right? They're not going to do a negotiated resolution where you admit fault and you accept and kind of negotiate with the NCAA for the penalties, which I think should come as no surprise since the Michigan folks were ready to go to court. They're fighting their commissioner. There's a lot happening with this as it was unfolding a season ago. So there was 137 pages in this document. They pushed back on different allegations of wrongdoing. They were defending Jim Harbaugh. They're defending Sharon Moore. They shed light onto some of the text messages with Sharon and Connor Stalions that were deleted and then recovered and submitted to the NCAA over the period of time. There's like 52 messages that were initially deleted. Some of them were about specific things that Connor Stalions noticed, right? Of Michigan State does this, Nebraska does this, et cetera, et cetera. Schools pushing back, saying that, they had all of this documentation from him and other coaches he talked to, where he was saying he was getting it from TV feeds and sky cams and all these different angles, right? So they're arguing that what he's been accused of is not actually what happened, and that things were extra salacious, the frenzy, the media coverage, et cetera, et cetera. So that's Michigan's side of this. There was also an interesting tidbit about the tipster, because everyone had wondered where the NCAA got the information, but also just like the direction. Hey, look at Michigan, look at this guy, Connor Stalions, and look at what he's doing with this impermissible on-campus scouting scheme. And according to this document, Michigan believes that the tipster came from Ann Arbor. They're saying that
Ryan
the
Day's
unnamed
brother?
source, which the NCAA has not disclosed, appears to have worked at the school at one point. They believe the confidential leaker was used by the NCAA to produce at least some of the charges in the notice of allegations, and they're concerned about that. So that's an interesting wrinkle. Would love to get more information about that by the time we get to the final chapter of this story. The next step is, there'd be a hearing with the Committee on Infractions, and they're contesting it. So this takes a lot longer, but they have an opportunity, the folks directly involved, to defend themselves and continue to make their arguments. But listen, I don't think anyone's surprised that Michigan is fighting all of these allegations. I don't think it's a surprise that they are defending that, like they're saying the other coaches, were not involved. Very few of them were even aware of it. There were a couple comments made about like this, your little scheme or whatever, to Connor Stalions, dismissing it, that it's not worth doing. He tried to have someone drive to Georgia to potentially watch a Georgia game because they could potentially have played them in the college football playoff. And people are like, absolutely not. Do not, make a low-level manager or someone do that. Like there's a lot of downplaying in this report. And that makes a lot of sense with what Michigan's facing, especially the fact that Sharon Moore, Jim Harbaugh, a couple of these folks could be repeat offenders because of the COVID area recruiting violations. All that to say, it's very interesting because, we're getting an insight into how they plan to fight the allegations there as well. But it's nowhere near the end. So we still don't know, how the NCAA feels about this. Well, we have a better sense of it because we've seen the notice of the allegation. Like, we know what they're alleging here. But I don't think it should come as a surprise the way that Michigan is attempting to defend itself and deflect and say that some of these charges feel a little bit trumped up because of the sensational nature of the scandal.
Yeah, it's a really interesting thing here. I'll start by saying I think Michigan's actually playing this right, because the further they get away from this, I think the less relevant it is in people's minds. And so the longer timeline, I think there are more people that are like, either it wasn't that big of a deal or I just want this to be done. Right. And so I think they're benefiting from that in terms of the court of public opinion, which is a very interesting thing here. I also like 6 level 1 infractions that they're alleging here. It feels like something that you should not just take a negotiated resolution on. I think it is something that you should fight, because if you're the AD or if you're the administration for Michigan, 6 level 1 infractions, they're going to come in and try to slap you with all kinds of punishments. And like, you're just going to sit there and say, oh, we're cool with that. Like, no, I think the right thing is to try to fight it and say, oh, we stand by our guys. But I do think one of the most interesting things here is there is certainly a tone shift from he was a lone wolf to, well, actually we kind of had guys discouraging him, and like we knew to distance ourselves a little bit from this guy because he was kind of doing some stuff. And it's like, okay, so was he a lone wolf and nobody was aware, or were you guys aware that this dude was acting in a nefarious manner and you just were kind of trying to push it to the side? But you knew what he was bringing was valuable and you were using it on game day. That's the interesting thing. Obviously, there are facts of the matter and things that you can and cannot prove. But there's a tone shift, certainly to me, that's happened here from lone wolf to, well, we just kind of told him to go play in his corner over there.
Well, and also like that does become a problem with the NCAA, right? Because like knowing but not acting, not reporting things become violations. So it's going to be very interesting to see how this goes. I think your point about just kind of dragging it out and fighting it is the right strategy here.
Yeah.
We have seen in recent years, like with Tennessee and some other cases where like if the school is really cooperative, they can avoid some of the heavier penalties. We don't know what kind of penalties are on the table here for Michigan. I was in the room with Charlie Baker, the NCAA president. We all were at the convention about a week after, actually, no, just a couple days after Michigan won the title, beat Washington. And he said that he was defending like the NCAA getting involved early and giving information to the Big Ten, allowing them to act, which of course they did, and suspended Jim Harbaugh. And said that allowed them to believe that, like he said, that he didn't think anyone watched that championship run and didn't believe that they won it fair and square, right? Because the information was out and they got rid of, Stalions was not on staff, and Harbaugh, the advantage of having a head coach like that was not there for a couple of weeks. So it's interesting. I think it would be hard for them to come down super, super hard after the NCAA president says something like that. But we don't know. We don't know exactly where it's going. We don't know what kind of penalties are on the table. And it's going to be interesting as this continues to get fought, because it took forever for the recruiting violations case to reach a conclusion. This could still take some serious time. And when you have a coach or multiple coaches that are no longer in college, you can do show causes. You can say if you come back, you're to be suspended for multiple years. But ultimately, those aren't penalties with much teeth.
Right. And I do think too, from Charlie Baker's standpoint, he was in an impossible position with Michigan winning. And I felt like I had this conversation with a lot of people, but like the best defense for Michigan was to win that championship after all the penalties that they did have that were kind of unprecedented. But I feel like it's a really tough spot to discredit your champion. I always say it's the most important thing in the sport. And so right after the game, saying that it's fair and square, I think is the right thing to say, because you don't want to discredit it. But there's this part that you have to reconcile with when you have the case, what you actually do at that point. And, again, we're talking about whatever penalties we have here are going to be an indictment on the 3-year run, but in particular, the championship run for Michigan too. And again, I just asked the question, how much do you want to invalidate one of your champions? It's a really difficult thing to do, because championships are the most important thing.
Yeah. So we'll see what happens there. But again, not a surprise. Michigan is fighting, and that this is going to be contested, which puts it on a different track. It does take a lot longer, and there's a hearing with the Committee on Infraction. So still more chapters to go in the Michigan saga. And we will see what ends up happening in retrospect to that national championship run and that basically the end of the Harbaugh era at Michigan.